Okay, welcome back to another episode of The Millennial Entrepreneur. This is episode 30. We've hit number 30, and it's a real special number 30 for you guys because in this episode, I had a fantastic chat with Stefanie Sword-Williams. Steph is a huge believer in self-advocacy and empowerment to lead people to freely and openly talk about their achievements proudly. And so we talk about how the origin story of her business called Fuck Being Humble, of how it started as an Instagram page to turning into her becoming a published author, delivering talks to huge international companies. Having recently been named one of Forbes 30 under 30 in 2020, among some other amazing accolades, Stef and I talk about this and how she feels following this huge growth in the space of only 2 years. We talk about this and how she faced burnout and the recovery from that as well. It's a really good story, and I really encourage you to listen to the end because it's really inspiring, and I had a great time talking to Stef. All right, shout out time. So if you don't know, every week I'm giving a shout out to someone who's left a written review on Apple Podcasts, or, has dropped me a little DM, or, dropped a very good comment on LinkedIn. I see everything. Any support, I'll basically give a shout out to you. But the easiest way is to leave a written review on Apple Podcasts. So this week is actually coming from the US, following my episode with Clara Baldwin, I think, because it makes sense. Shout out to the US fans. And they say, hey, this is an amazing podcast, names and all. I think this has potential to be on par with one of the great podcasts, Joe Rogan and Stuff You Know, etc. I very much enjoyed listening to all different aspects you give on entrepreneurship. Keep up the good work. And that's by O'Brien on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for that review. I don't know if I'm up to the same level as Joe Rogan because he's been going for a huge number of years, but thank you so much for that kind comment. And if you, like O'Brien, wants to feature in the next episode, be sure to leave a written review on Apple Podcasts because I will give you a shout out. Okay, I know you're very tired of listening to me, so now, without further ado, let's get on with Steph's story. Okay, hey Steph, how you doing?
Hi, I'm really good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. We had to stop recording and re-record because the sound quality wasn't good, but we're back now.
We are back, and if it wasn't for technical remote working problems, I don't think this would be truly authentic. So fingers crossed it's a bit smoother.
No, yeah, it's perfect now. We were just talking about, so you went on holiday, and you went on holiday because you needed a break. And yeah, I was saying how I'm pretty jealous of you because I didn't get to go on holiday. But hopefully in the future sometime.
Absolutely. It's been such a hard time for people. I kind of felt bad going away because I know so many people couldn't. I think we forget how important a holiday is for our mental health and actually just taking a break from things. So I know I was definitely close to burnout. So I appreciate having that time away. And I definitely feel a bit more refreshed and charged to come back to work.
Yeah, because you're working like for yourself basically, and you're constantly like promoting things. You're constantly promoting yourself, your book. So like, yeah, it must be really tough, right?
It's definitely really intense. I think when I started for Being Humble, it was a side hustle, which on top of a full-time job was really like intense and stressful. And I always thought like, gosh, it'll be so much easier when I go full time eventually if I ever do. And now that I am full time running Foot Being Humble, it's equally as busy, if not more busy. And I don't actually know how I ever managed running a job and running the platform. So I think it's that thing where no matter what your situation, you'll always, if it's your idea, you'll always want to pour all of your energy into it, all of your like soul into an idea. And you just have to be quite careful that it doesn't make you sort of burn out like I've definitely felt in the past. But yeah, I think the very nature of the platform, which is obviously encouraging people to self promote, means that I am religiously doing it as well, and I think that can be quite draining and also just quite, you constantly have to be sure of yourself in that way, which obviously I really do try and help people with doing that, but it definitely, you've really got to keep momentum with a project and a movement like this.
You're an extremely like impressive person that I've wanted to have on the podcast for like quite a long time. Because everything that you kind of do, this podcast stands for, especially around stuff like, you know, promoting women and inclusion and all of that stuff. I love that whole message, especially in entrepreneurship, because it's an area that we spoke about before on the podcast. And like women, founders of color, all of that stuff, like we are pretty underrepresented in the industry as a whole. That's just what the data says. And so, yeah, I wanted to have you on for a long time, but I'd love to kind of know where the whole journey of self promotion actually started for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, thank you so much. That's really kind of you to say. It's always really amazing to hear people from around the world be interested in being humble. You kind of have to have a bit of reality check that people are actually listening and engaging with it sometimes. In terms of how it started, we obviously briefly spoke about this, but for anyone who doesn't know much about the Foot Being Humble journey, I've been working in advertising for the past 7 years. And with that, obviously, you learn a lot about storytelling and the importance of storytelling. And a big thing that almost all brands do in advertising is self promote and communicate, their value to people to try and get people engaged and involved in their product or their brand. And when I started working in London, I moved to London 3 years ago now, which is crazy to think. And I joined a startup where I had to do a lot of new business development and networking. And I'd actually never done it before. And I learned a lot about networking and how you build up the skills to do it properly. And when I went to a lot of these events, I kept on seeing panels that were often underrepresented. It was a lot of, I always make the joke, it was white male, pale, and stale. And it was very much like over 50 white men in suits. Even though it was the creative industry, it was very often like, CEOs who've run global agencies for 20 years. And rarely did I see women, particularly women of color. And my thing was always sort of under the age of 30. And whilst I was going to these industry events that I saw very similar representation, I was also going to really cool exhibitions and following cool people on Instagram who stood against all of that and were my age and black and brown women and people with disabilities, and there's so many different amazing people doing really inspiring things, but they weren't being invited to speak on panels or being featured in mainstream publications. And I was kind of asking myself, why is this? And of course we can blame it on the event organizers, because a lot of the time it is their problem and it is that hierarchical status quo that isn't challenged. But I also think there is a big problem with the fact that many of us just aren't taught on how to self promote in order to get ourselves to those stages and to get ourselves seen by those people. So I could see there was a disconnect there. And then simultaneously, I had friends constantly coming to me. I turned into a bit of like a career agony, and I'd been I moved jobs quite regularly. I'd had 7 jobs in 6 years. No, 6 jobs in 7 years. And I really stand by that. For me, anyone that's listening who's definitely in the younger audience, please, please don't feel the need to stay in one company for the rest of your life. I'm a strong
Yeah,
believer that you should move.
I stand by that as well.
Yeah, you should constantly move. Someone said the best thing to me was like, unless you feel like the shittest person in the room, you need to keep changing rooms. And it's always stuck with me. And I feel like that was something that I had to learn about interviews and CVs and cover notes and selling myself, because I did want to regularly move, because those things don't just happen easily. And so I was helping a lot of my peers, and I kind of felt like we've got a problem of representation. I know there's amazing people out there doing amazing things. And there's also people I know that struggle with self promotion and CV writing and just talking about their achievements, literally just verbally with their friends. Like, it's so hard for some people. So I kind of just combined all that thinking together. And my thinking was always I could wait 10, 20 years until I've, won some big achievement in the industry, hopefully, or if I become an MD of a business or a CEO, or I could just create something where I'd get noticed, but more importantly, I could give a space to people who deserve to be noticed. And I always said if I wasn't going to get invited to speak on those stages, I'll create my own stage where I choose who I represent and I celebrate. And so that's sort of the journey of where it all started.
I love the whole, yeah, they don't give me a stage, so I'm gonna make my own stage. I love that. That's so cool. We actually had a girl, like, it's funny you talk about like the whole representation thing. We had a girl on the podcast a few episodes ago. She had a iced coffee brand, and she was in talks with like a very big brand on them buying it. But they, so she's a bit younger than me. She's quite young. So this is probably why they said this. They basically, like, after a lot of negotiation, they basically turned around to her and said, your brand is like, you're adorable. Like, that's the word that they use. And I thought that was such a like patronizing word for her. And I really believe if it wasn't like for her gender or her age, they wouldn't have used that word.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, uh, I'll try to save the rant for another day, but I think the women way that women are treated, spoken to, the expectations, the way that we support female ambitions. Like there's such a disconnect between male and female, and it's painful in 2020 for that to actually be the case. But that those sorts of things can have such a lingering impact and effect on people's sort of ambitions and what they how they see themselves, and it does really frustrate me when I hear stories like that.
Yeah, I mean, you must hear them pretty much on a daily basis, right? Because this is the industry that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I've experienced them myself. One of my first jobs was actually really toxic, and I had like an awful boss who was just verbally really abusive and would say like horrendous things to the team, saying that we didn't deserve the air we breathed, and if things didn't go well, he'd lose his shit, and it was scary, and it definitely made you question your worth. And I think I actually think there needs to be like work therapy out there for people, because specifically designed to address the issues that we've had in the workplace, because they can really impact how we see ourselves. And I know from my own personal experience how bosses or colleagues have treated me, and how that's made me question certain aspects of myself, where I feel vulnerable. And um, in some cases, it's made me feel vulnerable, but in a lot of ways, it's actually just pushed me to work even harder and to prove them wrong. And I think that's the best advice I can ever give to anyone that makes you feel that way, is there's no sweeter feeling than being like, actually, look what I've done. I remember someone said to me, like, oh, you'll never go outside the city. You think you'll go really far, but you won't. And it was when I was living in Manchester, um, and obviously, like, 3 years later, I've just finished my first book and I'm running my own business, and I'm really getting a lot of momentum and excitement around what I'm doing, and I feel really proud that I can kind of, I don't even need to go back to that person and show them. I'm sure they can see what's happening, but it's a really nice way to be like, actually, I don't need to soak in the negativity that other people project. Actually, I can let go of that and let it be the thing that motivates me instead.
So obviously there was a huge sort of driver for you to create this platform for yourself.
Yeah.
Did you actually know what sort of thing you wanted to get out of it? What sort of thing you wanted to talk about? Or was it just, I want a platform for this, and then it will kind of follow on from there?
That's such an interesting question, and I actually rarely get asked that, so I'm glad you asked it. To be really transparent, there were two reasons I wanted to do it. So, like many people who work in the advertising industry, there are lots of companies and clients that say they want to do good in the world, and then you join those environments and you think that you're going to get to work on purpose led work, and then all of a sudden you're selling whiskey and nobody's being helped. And when you are working for a company, you are a cog in the machine, you don't control budgets, you just have to churn. And for me, I just really wanted something where I could go to bed at the end of the day and be like, I made a positive impact today. And helping people with career advice and support, I think people just always think about like a careers advisor exactly how they were at school, which is just a really grumpy old middle-aged person who isn't hugely inspiring or empowering. So I really loved the idea of feeling like I could look back and do something and do some great in the world. And then I think, secondly, from a personal perspective, I always had ambitions that I wanted to be a TED speaker on my top goal list, and that I would love to have made, like, the Forbes under 30 list and those things. And I just had a bit of a real honest chat with myself where I said, am I going to do this? Pushing the work that I'm pushing, only ever remaining in a company with other people where it's the company gets the spotlight, it's never necessarily me. And particularly as someone who works as an account management and production, is you're very often the last person in the pecking order, and that people care about. So I sort of, selfishly wanted to think about, okay, well, if I want those things in my career, do I have to wait 10, 20 years to go run my own agency, or, wait till I've figured out how to do all of that? Or can I do something on the side, where the best possible outcome is that I'm just helping people and it's immediate impact, but side effects of that could actually be that I do grow my presence and I do grow my profile, which I'm really proud that the latter has actually come true as a result of everything that I've done with Foot Being Humble. So this year I made the Forbes under 30 list. The Dots named me as the 100 women changing the creative industry. And during lockdown, I got to give a TEDx talk. So not quite TED, but I managed to do that. And I really do believe that had I not have invested in a side hustle, Foot Being Humble, those opportunities for my profile just would not have happened.
Before we talk about like Forbes 30 under 30 and the TEDx talks and all of that stuff, because I do want to go into those because I think that's really interesting. Before we go on to those, did you ever envisage the Fuck Being Humble? Like, you just talked about sort of the motivations behind it, but did you ever envision it getting it this big and actually inspiring this many people?
No, it like I actually, the irony is, like, I actually really struggle to sit down and reflect on the impact, because if I do, I think I'll probably get really emotional about it. Um, but I think I'd worked in advertising for 7 years. I know what makes a good brand. I know what how storytelling works. I really love looking at behavioral and emotional psychology. And I just think I've always been someone that likes to be as inclusive as possible. And so I think combining all of those kind of skills and that awareness, I just did what I thought was, a good formula for something cool. And for me, honestly, a big part of it as well was, like, I didn't get a pay review in one of my jobs. I didn't get the pay increase that I asked for. So I was like, you know what, fuck this. I'm going to go make some more money myself somehow. And this was also a good way for me to make money. So it really, I always make the joke, it was only ever meant to be like a side hustle or like a hobby, or something I did in my spare time. It was never meant to be a book and all the things that has come from it. And it's really surreal to think of the progress that has happened in 2 years. I'm like eternally grateful for anyone that's ever respected and valued. And I think one of the things that I've had to come up against a lot is, particularly against white middle class men, is people obviously challenging me for the name. Foot Being Humble, it goes against what we've been told for years. So it does get quite a lot of stick, and I am the receiving end of that. But it's amazing to see people who have either changed their minds, or to be featured in mainstream press, and see that, or even being booked by brands like The Guardian and Google and Unilever, because it shows that there's obviously merit and substance to what I'm talking about. And I think I can't, everybody asks me, what's next? What are you doing next? And I'm like, I don't know really, because I I haven't planned that far in ahead. I think, to your point, like, I think part of my ambition is, like, I plan month to month. Like, I haven't got that. What does 5 years, like 10 years look like? Because I just try and take most days as they come and kind of be grateful for whatever comes my way.
But I think that's what makes it like I think that's what gives it the sort of specialty factor. I think if you planned it too far in advance, it wouldn't. I don't know. For me, I wouldn't be able to do that either. I think it would just kind of make the story not as enjoyable, I suppose. Like the whole fact of the journey, and like you must think this as well, is because it's unexpected or it kind of exceeds expectations. And Like that's the magical factor behind it all, I think.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people ask me about goal setting and whether it's important. And I think it's really good for you to have aspirations and ambitions that you aim towards. I have definitely, with Foot being humble, tried not to, because, like you say, anything that comes from it, I'm just then really grateful and humbled by, because I believe it or not, I can be humble and I do appreciate those things. But I think it helps you to reduce the pressure on performing or reaching a goal by an age or by a certain point, and actually it just makes you just really appreciate when things do go really well. It's just an added bonus then, rather than like goal tick done.
I was on the BBC actually talking about that, how we set age limits on success, whatever success is in our eyes, and that just sets us up for like a lot of anxiety and it's such a toxic thing to do, but it's something that's very, very prevalent in our generation. Yeah, it's huge. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now because I mean we've talked about that a lot on other episodes, but yeah, it's something that definitely exists.
Absolutely. And I think it's so easy. I talk about it in the book actually. I talk about there's like three stages of envy, like straight up envy, resentment envy, and then fantasy envy. And I talk about like fantasy envy being this emotion that we feel where we're jealous of things we don't actually want in our lives. We're just jealous because we feel like we should be doing something. And it's I have to obviously, there's my career has kind of supercharged and gone really quickly, and I definitely have some peers that feel like, oh, why has that not happened yet? And I just have to constantly remind them that, like, if you look at it like a timeline of when is it going to happen for me, when is everything going to fall into place, you're just constantly living this like resentment or regret that like not everything's happening immediately. And I wrote about in the book, like Samuel L. Jackson was only in a first good film, like aged 40. Vera Wang only designed a wedding dress or had her own wedding dress shot when she was like 40 or 50 as well. Like there's lots of things that happen to like people later on in life. David Attenborough, like absolute legend, and he's like over 80. Like it doesn't, we could work our entire careers, and that light bulb moment or that profile raising may not actually get the outcome you want until you are 95, but that doesn't mean none of it's worth it. But I think on the flip side of that as well, I also just want to say, like, because I've definitely suffered ageism in the workplace where people have been like, oh, you're only 25 though, just hold on, that'll happen in a few years. And I think it's really worth noting that when you have people treat you like that, that's not a good environment. That is not a space where you're being empowered and encouraged. That is older people feeling either threatened or struggling to manage your ambitions. And actually it's not a healthy space for you to be in, because you need to be in rooms where people are like, wow, you're doing amazing at your age. Like, not in spite of it, they need to be like, that you don't want them slowing you down because you're performing very well at a young age. Like that is not the space you need to be in. So it's absolutely a balancing act. I don't think that you should set, timelines where you're like, by 30 I need to be on X salary, or X, Y, and Z, because as a global pandemic has just taught us, all of that can get thrown out of the window in seconds. So it's I think like just letting yourself go of like not unexpected, but like really letting yourself free of any goals maybe you set when you were like 10 or 15 or even last year, and just recognizing that every year you change, the world changes, your industry changes, and sometimes that trajectory that you envisaged for yourself or the career that you'd lined up doesn't always work out that way, and it's really okay. And also there's that element of like, when you go too quick, there is that thing of like, well, what now, next? And that, I think sometimes you can get into a burnout phase from that, when you're constantly pressuring yourself to perform, when sometimes you just need to slow down a bit and like relish in those moments of success.
I wanted to talk to Steph a bit more about the Fuck Being Humble journey and how it went from a group of promoting self-advocacy to eventually becoming a published author and, having an actual book to sell on Amazon and everything. A really exciting process, but I really wanted to sort of talk to her about the transition because it's such a quick transition in the space of only 2 years. So we talk about that now.
Sure. So I basically started an Instagram page because I definitely have an addiction to Instagram. I was like, I need to channel this more productively. So I made an Instagram account. I wrote an article on LinkedIn why I started a self-promotion platform called Fuck Being Humble. Obviously, LinkedIn can be quite dry and it needs disrupting. And that was very disruptive at the time. Lots of people read it, liked it, shared it. I got interviewed by the Times. They wrote a double page spread on Foot Being Humble before I'd even started running my event series. Then I was invited to speak on BBC World News, and it just like really organically grew very quickly. And I had a lot of pressure building on me before I'd even ran my first event. And events were always at the core of the service offering. So I always wanted to run community-led events where it was accessible in price and as I said, like had panels of diverse creatives that were doing really cool stuff that people could learn from. So I sort of ran the events and went from there, and the momentum it was gaining, I got a few phone calls from different publishers saying you should write a book, and I literally was like, no thank you, I'm not a writer. Hung up the phone. And it's kind of funny because I've always been a really good talker and storyteller, but writing is not necessarily where I would have placed myself at. It's always that thing of like practice. I never really had the practice to do it. And then when I started to see the impact that Foot Being Humble was having, I started getting more corporate clients speaking for brands like Google and Unilever and Warner Music. I started to see that people were really buying into what I was talking about. And actually, I was seeing results and I was really helping people. So I got back in contact with the publisher and I was like, okay, let's go for this. I had to write a proposal and 2 sample chapters. And when you do that, then it gets sent out to a range of different publishers and then they bid on it. So it was a full auction bid, 4 people kind of put in an offer, and then I chose who I felt was going to do the best job. And then I had 8 months to write the book. So it was really intense. It was a full-time job, so I spent every Saturday writing it. And then it's kind of all slowly just come together really nicely. But I think my core channels were always like Instagram and LinkedIn were where I knew my audience. Instagram was where I'd build a community and could share funny memes about selling sunsets or just jokes, kind of content that could connect with everyday people. LinkedIn was where I'd push my profile, attract clients, get more corporate talks and help just sort of build my reputation. And then there was obviously the events, which was the service and the offering that I was giving. And then the book was really nice because it was essentially like a physical manifestation of the brand and the message actually. And it's amazing to know that it will always be out there in the world, and people can pick it up and have it with them for the rest of their life.
What's really interesting to me is that you started this as a side hustle, which is really commendable. And I also think that's how you should start a lot of projects. I'm starting a side hustle at the moment in the food space and like really enjoying it, actually. I'm planning on doing a vlog series about it. But yeah, so I'm doing that. But I think if you do it as like a solo thing just to start off with, I don't know, like I like like planning stuff on the side. But I don't know why I'm getting a bit like going on a tangent here. My actual question was, this side hustle that you started, obviously you talked about the reception of the name before, so Fuck Being Humble. Obviously you still had your job and they must have seen that sort of thing. What was the sort of reception from there?
Yeah, again, really good question. I actually think I might write an article about how to grow a side hustle whilst working full time, because I know that's a lot of people get nervous or worried about it. I think initially there was a bit of a, can you handle doing both? To which I obviously just explained that yes, it's just like me having a hobby of going to football or playing hockey on a weekends. It's just that I'm actually just working on it on social media. There's the benefits of like building my network, building connections. I raise my profile, I raise the company profile. I think for anyone who's wanting to start a side hustle with a full-time job, it's really worth really just carefully formulating a plan for when that conversation comes up, or how you can discuss the benefits, why it will work, how you can really reassure them that it won't affect your time management, or your, I don't know, it won't take away from your full-time job, because that's all companies really care about. But one thing I would say that I learned to get better at is that sometimes you feel like you want to share as much about it, just to be transparent and honest, but also to show them that you're growing and you're doing cool stuff outside the job, and they should see that, because then maybe you could do more stuff within the workplace. I think the flip side is, sadly, particularly in older generations, there is a bit of an insecurity around that, and a fear that maybe you'll go off and do different things. Back in my parents' days, and older generations, you'd just literally have one job, no hobbies. You'd come home, cook dinner, go to that was it. So it's quite hard for people to comprehend how we could all be doing it in one go. But I think just be considerate with what you share, and don't feel like you need to overshare. Just sort of, tell them as and when they need to know information, or when you think it might help you in the workplace. But just be mindful that some people are a bit nervous about it. I think if I ever employ someone and they have a side hustle, I'll do nothing but encourage and respect them, providing that they are able to manage both. Because I think it's really important to like remind people that you work usually 8 hours a day in a job. So really, a side hustle means you can only ever work 3 or 4 hours at night on it. So as long as you can communicate to an employer that it's not going to affect how you perform in the day job, then that should be fine. But yeah, I had a mixed response. I had some really positive ones, and then I had definitely a few situations where it was questioned. But again, I think it's about assessing whether that's a genuine concern, or whether it's an insecurity of that person, or perhaps the company isn't performing that well and they think you should be working harder. And then it's just about having an honest conversation about what the real problem is, as opposed to it being you and your side hustle.
And plus, I guess a lot of people don't really understand it. I think a lot of people have that sort of perception, or that sort of roadmap in their minds of get a job 9 to 5, and then that's kind of it. And I'm not saying that's wrong at all. I'm saying that just doesn't work with some people. But when you kind of have conversations with say older generations or older views, where that is all they know, and then you bring up this side hustle, especially with a name like "fuck being humble," they'll be like,
Yeah.
what even is it?
Yeah, and I think the closer it is to your chosen industry, that's where there's a bit of doubt and fear. Because obviously, they might think, well, you could have done that for us, or there's so many complex conversations that could be had. But I think it's really just about like having really strong confidence in yourself, and communicating that they don't need to overlap. They can work separately, and they won't interfere with one another. But just, yeah, I think, I've built a huge network of people. I've spoken to brands there's no way I would have got in front of if I hadn't have started Foot Being Humble, that I actually could have, generated business out of in my full-time job. And I think it's just about communicating to your employer the actual benefits of it, rather than it being something that would distract you.
I want to move on to Forbes 30 under 30 and every other sort of all those other ones. How did those kind of come about?
So with Forbes 30 under 30, I actually nominated myself, and I'm really passionate about being open about this, because I think we sit around and wait for these opportunities to happen for us, when we don't realize that behind every successful celebrity or entrepreneur is a marketing team or a PR agent getting them those opportunities. So I had to fill out like 75 questions on why I deserved to be the Forbes under 30, and it was horrible. I nearly quit about 3 times. I was like, I can't do this. There's no way. And I'm so glad I persevered, because it's that immediate self-doubt that talks us out of so many situations or, opportunities. So I think for that, I just nominated myself, and that came through, and that was amazing. With like the Dots Creative 100 Women, that was based on an event. I hosted a workshop of mine. Somebody attended and then put me forward. And again, I invited someone that I'd not spoken to in ages, and she bought a plus one, and she ended up being the person that got me that nomination of the Dots 100 Women. And I think that again is really important about. I think a lot of the time we get worried about reaching out to old connections or school friends or people you've not spoken to in a while, but you just never know who they might know or who they might bring, or it's really important to just be as open as possible and be as inclusive as possible, because you never know how people might help you with that. I think naturally, like obviously with the book, and like during lockdown, I literally did, I think, a webinar like every week from March to about June, July, when I started to like be like, no, I need to I need to slow down. And that was really intense. But how often do you constantly put something out, constantly show your value every single week? And obviously those workshops that I was running were how to write your CV, how to self promote, how to get more money, and it ended up being a really good word of mouth space and way to build up my global sort of audience, which has been amazing, because before I was only really targeting people in London. Now I had people joining from South Africa to New York to New Zealand to Australia. And it's that whole thing is, the more content you put out about yourself, the more you will be seen. It's really basic. It's really obvious, but I have lots of people that I've supported and helped, and they've said, I just really want to get a job with this place, or I want to be known for this. And I'm like, but what are you doing to make that happen other than just producing work? Because if a shop just produced a pair of trainers and put them in their store, people wouldn't just rock up and say, oh, I'm going to buy those, or I'm going to Instagram those. Somehow you have to get people to your shop window. So how are you doing that? And I think that's really important with winning any sort of industry recognition, is like somebody's got to be writing that proposal or that case study or filling out that form for you. If it's not you, then who is doing that? And a lot of the time we've got to get over this fear that we sound stupid or that it's self-indulgent, and just realize that everyone is doing it.
This is something that I want to be really transparent about as well. Like even this, so you speak about like wanting opportunities to come to you. They just don't. They never come towards you. You have to do stuff to attract those sort of things. And even like just to show you the power of this, even this podcast that I created a few months ago in lockdown, like I guess a lot of people will. I've had a lot of questions from people like wanting to start a podcast, thinking like, should I actually start one? Will anyone actually like listen to me? And just bring up a lot of excuses about it. But for me, it's brought up so many cool opportunities. Like I've, especially around my sponsorship, like they gave me like a lump sum of money, and they've given me like a free MBA to do, fully funded, which is worth like $1,000. And like
Wow,
that's,
amazing.
those are some like crazy, yeah, it's actually so sick. Like I can't express how cool that is. But even though like this podcast is fairly small in the grand scheme of things compared to say the big ones, even still, because like it's me and it's just me basically and my editor recently behind this project, it's opened so many doors for me. It's really crazy. Like I've spoken BBC, I've spoken like at other events, and if it wasn't for this podcast, it wouldn't be possible. And so I think your message around that is 100% true. And I just want to resonate that you don't have to be as big as you to reap those benefits. You can literally be as small as, well, I'm not that small now, but in the early stages, it just takes a while to grow, but it will come. Those opportunities will come.
To follow on from that is that like 2 years ago I was a nobody, like, and I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
saying you're a nobody or
exactly.
anyone listening is a nobody, but like I wasn't recognized in the industry. I felt like I was constantly working really hard. I felt like it was overlooked. I felt just frustration and resentment. I never felt valued. And I feel like, yeah, all the things that you've just said is, when you create something that you can be known for outside of work, or outside of the constraints of a company or a client's demands, then that is what you will get known for. That is how you build your reputation. Until you do that, sadly, for a lot of people, you are just a cog in the machine. And it's not to say that everyone needs to do it, and it's not to say you can't have a really successful career just working at a company. But I just think it's that whole question I ask a lot of people, and I think it's probably nice for me to use this towards the end, which is like, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered? What do you want your grandkids to say about you? And if what you're doing right now isn't enough to fulfill that dream of what you want people to think of you, or you want your legacy to be, then how can you get to that? How can you get closer to that?
Steph, I think that's an amazing note to finish on, actually. I'm not going to say anything else because I think that was a really good note to end on. Thank you so much for coming on. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you finally and to actually have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really nice to chat, and I wish you all the luck with the podcast and any of the future stuff that you work on.
Okay, great, cool. How can people stay in touch with you and what you're doing? I know loads of people will try to, get in contact with you and see what you're up to.
So if you follow us on Instagram at fbeinghumbleldn, yeah, definitely follow us. I put all the daily tips and advice on there, so check us out on there. Please do grab a copy of the Foot Being Humble book. Honestly, I've had so many people get in touch to say it's been just what they needed post-pandemic.
I'll put the link in the description for all of those.
Amazing, thank you. I'm also running a side hustle school, which is a course to help people start their own side hustle and passion projects. It's actually starting on the 19th of October. So if this comes out after then, I'll actually be running the course in the future and sort of hopefully monthly at some point. So please do stay in touch and join the newsletter, because that's usually where I'll promote all of these things so that you can stay on top of any exciting opportunities for sharing.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much again for coming on, Steph. And maybe I'll have you on in the future. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a part 2.
Amazing. Well, I'll look forward to it if it happens. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Millennial Entrepreneur, and thank you so much for listening to the very end of the podcast. It really means a lot. If you want to check out Steph's book, it's in the link below. It's an Amazon link, so be sure to check that out. It's a really, really cool story, and I can't wait to actually get my hands on a book and read it myself. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. We do podcasts on millennial entrepreneurs, as it says in the title. But if you're new, please be sure to leave a written review on Apple Podcasts. I'll give you a shout out in the next episode. Be sure to subscribe and to follow us on our Instagram page. That's where all the new episodes get announced, along with all the audiograms, all of the previews, all of that good stuff. So we've just hit episode 30, and with your support in the future, I'm sure we can hit another 30 and another 30 after that. So thank you so much for supporting, and I'll see you in the next episode.